Hi, everyone, and welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is Victoria Sheehan. She's the Executive Director of the Transportation Research Boards of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. She began this new role in December of 2022, succeeding Neil Peterson. Victoria comes to TRB from the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, which she led as commissioner for the previous 7 years. There, she was responsible for an operating budget of over $650 million and led a staff of more than 1,600 employees representing diverse areas such as aeronautics, rail, transit, construction, operations, finance, and administration. Before joining New Hampshire DOT, Victoria spent 10 years at the Massachusetts DOT, leading strategic planning and highway performance and overseeing an 8-year, $3 billion accelerated bridge program. Victoria served as president of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials in 2020 to 2021, and has been an active board member in a range of other professional organizations. Victoria holds a master's degree in structural engineering and architecture from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Victoria, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you as well.
Well, today, a big shout out to the 2023 class of the IBTTA Leadership Academy, which graduated last Friday in Washington, D.C. Congratulations to all 40 graduates on a very intense and productive week. We wish you much success in all your future endeavors. Well, this is Café IBTTA, where we drink coffee and talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And we are taking your questions and comments, and we want to get started right away. I mentioned that our guest grew up in Northern Ireland. So if you have been to any part of Ireland, or if you haven't been there and it's on your bucket list, tell us your favorite place or your favorite things to do in Ireland. Please tell us in the chat function using everyone or all panelists and attendees. Yeah, tell us your favorite things about Ireland. Nobody's ever been. Here we go. The city of Adair, anywhere, doing anything. Very green, yes. Golf, of course. The music. Oh, I was born in Aberdeen, Scotland, but I've never been. Jeez, come on, Ian. Whiskey tasting, yes. Drink, dingle. Great people. Absolutely. Thank you, Tom Nucky. I agree. I heartily agree. The people. Guinness, yeah. You're always on search for a good pint of Guinness. All right, we'll come back to all your wonderful comments about Ireland and your favorite places and things to do. But for now, let's get to know our guest. Victoria, as I mentioned in the opening, you grew up in Northern Ireland. Would you tell us a little bit about what that was like for you?
So if anyone has seen the Netflix TV show Derry Girls, that was very much my upbringing. I grew up during that same period of time, and I'd like to say I had as fun a childhood as they portray in that particular show. It wasn't easy times growing up in Northern Ireland during that period, but I was very fortunate. Like in the show, I went to an all-girls school in the city. I went to school in Belfast, however, not in Derry. And the quality of the education that I received really was excellent. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that upbringing. I went to a school where they really were promoting opportunities for women in technology and science. I happened to be very good at those subjects. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to study at university, I was going back and forth. I wanted to do something that mattered. So, thinking about medicine or optometry, or working with people in that way. But, growing up in Northern Ireland, my father had sold construction equipment. So I kind of grew up around the construction industry. And I ended up pursuing a degree in structural engineering with architecture at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, as you mentioned in my bio. And I think I ended up pursuing engineering because transportation was something that really did matter to me. When I think about all of the milestones in my lifetime, transportation meant access to opportunity and new experiences and to some degree freedoms. Being able to get my first part-time job, to be able to travel and see the world. Transportation was those connections to other experiences. And so I think I always had a calling, based on my family situation, to be around the construction industry, but to work in transportation in particular.
Victoria, you'll find a lot of engineers in the audience on this program today, and I'm struck by how you speak about transportation and your connection to transportation and the sciences as something liberating, as giving you access to something that maybe you didn't have before. And I wonder if you could tease that out a little bit.
So like I said, every milestone in my life, I think about transportation. So the first time I was allowed to walk to the local convenience store, that was possible because even though I lived on a busy road, we had sidewalks, and it was safe for me to do so. The first time I rode my bike to school, I still remember that feeling of, wow, not only am I grown up and I have responsibility, but now where else can I go? Can I go to my friend's house to play? Can I do other things? And then, once I was mature enough to be allowed to ride the bus into town, to ride the train down to Dublin, it's 100 miles from Belfast to Dublin. Growing up in the Troubles, as we called it in Northern Ireland, to be able to go down to Dublin to go shopping. Every interaction I had with transportation, it was about a new experience. It was about those new freedoms. And like I said, that feeling of excitement the day I passed my driver's test and the doors that opened, I was very fortunate and privileged to have access to a car as a teenager. That meant I could work part-time and do things that some of my friends weren't able to do. My grandmother never had a driver's license. My uncle never had a driver's license. And so I saw firsthand how they were limited in the opportunities that came from their choice not to drive. But I also saw the quality of life that they had because they lived in communities where they could walk and bike and still access other opportunities. So, like I think from an early age, transportation, like I said, it meant that ability to pursue the things that I wanted to pursue.
I'm struck by your focus on active transportation here, the walking and the biking and those kinds of things. And I think this is something that we confront more and more, especially here in the United States, where you might refer to some parts of a community as a food desert. And maybe some parts of communities are really active transportation deserts that we've created so much roadway network. It's challenging for people to walk to the places that they want to go to, a difference from where you grew up, from the infrastructure that was available to you when you grew up.
And still, the city I grew up in, just outside of Belfast, everything has changed dramatically since my childhood. My dad lives in Dublin. I have a lot of family in the Dublin area. And you think about the suite of transportation options they have today in that city compared to 20, 30 years ago. It really is remarkable how many more transportation options there are today than even those I had as a child.
Victoria, you are similar to your predecessor in the sense that, like Neil Peterson, you were active as a volunteer in TRB before you took the top job in TRB. Tell us a little bit about how you first became involved in the Transportation Research Board.
So I should say I do not have the breadth of experience with TRB that Neil had. Neil had volunteered in, I think, every capacity. TRB is known for, of course, the research that we complete, but also the committee structure and the convening, as well as the advice that we provide to Congress and to others. And I know more the cooperative research side of TRB's work. I've had much more limited exposure to the other areas of TRB, but certainly I bring those volunteer experiences to this role. And I also bring the perspective that I was a consumer of TRB reports and deliverables long before I actually became engaged in the work of TRB. As you mentioned earlier, I was the program manager for a program at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation called the Accelerated Bridge Program. That particular program was established in legislation that actually directed the Department of Transportation to create a laboratory of innovation. So as we were addressing bridge condition, we were tasked with doing things differently. And so I think that was the first time I truly appreciated the work of TRB. I can remember sitting with all the different reports around me because we were trying to look at ways to deliver projects quickly and more efficiently, deliver work on time and on budget, use innovative materials and construction techniques. And so there was a whole body of work in each of those areas that I could review and learn from the states that have been on the true bleeding edge when it came to deploying new technologies and new techniques, and make sure that we were, yes, being that laboratory of innovation and taking risks in Massachusetts, but trying to bring to bear the work that had been done elsewhere in the country and elsewhere in the world as we thought about how to do things differently in that state.
Right, right. Victoria, a number of our viewers are fairly familiar with TRB, but some are relative newbies to TRB. And I wonder if you could give us a quick TRB 101 and help people understand how they can get engaged, especially folks in the tolling industry.
So I'll start with the research. So we're really known for the cooperative research programs that we have. The biggest is the NCHRP program. That's the National Highway Cooperative Research Program. But in total, we put out about 140 publications a year. And we're usually managing around 300 plus projects at any given time. And then the total investment is in excess of $60 million. We're funded with federal funds, and we have oversight committees that help us identify the projects. And that's really why TRB is so successful. Our industry partners, our stakeholders, they're involved in identifying the project needs and then following those research projects from start to finish, so that then we can really ensure that the outcomes are implemented as quickly as possible. So we're working with the state DOTs, we're working with the owners and operators of airports, we're working with transit agencies, and we're working with safety professionals across our cooperative research programs. And so there's always volunteer opportunities to serve on the panels for those projects. And we try to make sure that we have as many diverse perspectives as possible. We're trying to convene practitioners as well as academics to make sure that we have a balanced makeup to our panels and committees. But then, of course, we have 177 standing committees who convene regularly. We have webinars and meetings throughout the course of the year. Our signature event is the TRB annual meeting that occurs in January in Washington, D.C. every year. We had over 12,000 participants at annual meeting this year, but we are much more than those 5 days in January. Like I said, we're providing other opportunities to convene through our committee meetings, as well as webinars and other events over the course of the year. So we typically have around 100 webinars annually, as well as the in-person meetings. And then the last category of work is our consensus work. So that's where we often, at the request of Congress, are doing research on a particular topic. And the conclusion of those research projects is actual recommendations for legislation or policy changes. And there's countless examples of TRB research being adopted in legislation, especially the surface transportation bills that are passed by Congress to fund the work that we all do.
You know, Victoria, it's a testament to the power and impact of TRB that you can cause 12,000 people to organize their lives around an event in Washington, D.C. during one of the worst weather months of the year, January. You know, and people will organize their lives years in advance to be able to participate. That is a powerful testament to the strength and the relevance of TRB. You know, when we spoke last week, you mentioned that one of the challenges of leading TRB is curating all of this great research that's going on, that somebody might come up to you at a meeting and say, you know, we really ought to have some research on this. And you're thinking to yourself, well, we've already done research on that. You know, have you looked here? How do you grapple with that challenge?
I think that's become one of my highest priorities as the incoming executive director. We are doing great research, and the moment we conclude a project, we want to showcase that product, that deliverable. And so we have a lot of webinars and events that are focused on highlighting those most recently completed projects. But the downside of that is that we've lost track perhaps of some of the work that was completed a year ago, 2 years ago. And so how do we continue to make sure that, especially those that may be new to the industry or move into a new role, are aware of that body of work that's been completed and are bringing that to bear, especially with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's a lot of money being spent on transportation at this time. We want to make sure those dollars are spent wisely. And so ensuring that people are aware of the TRB products and leveraging those as they think about redesigning and reconfiguring their systems is extremely important. And so I think that is the biggest challenge. We're a large organization. We have over 8,500 volunteers who support the work and actually help us deliver the reports and produce the quality research that we're known for. But it's impossible, even as the executive director, to stay current with everything that we have going on at one time. And that's, like I said, at a point in time, when you look backwards, it's even more overwhelming. We have a database that is full of literally millions of reports and documents. So thinking about how we can make it easier for people to search those databases. We have executive summaries of our reports as well as the full reports, understanding who our audience is. For different individuals with different roles in the organizations, how do we curate that content so it's accessible to them? These are all the things that we really have to look closely at so that we can ensure that the work that we're doing, which, like I said, would not be possible without our volunteers, is leveraged by the entire industry.
Victoria, since you're thanking the volunteers, I also want to extend a thanks to you and to TRB. You folks are partnering with us in our upcoming Road Usage Charging and Finance Summit. And so a big shout out to the Standing Committee on Economics and Finance who are helping us with that. That meeting is going to bring together a broad collection of transportation communities to tackle issues of transportation finance and revenue. So we salute TRB for being one of our partners on that really important meeting. And Benton Tempest has a question. You mentioned you have about 300 projects going. Is there an average length of the research projects, and how many are multi-year projects?
So that really does depend on the year and the nature of the projects that we're working on. The Transportation Research Board is part of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And so it is extremely important that we maintain the reputation of the academies and ensure that we're advancing our work in such a way that the results are credible and that our process was rigorous, so that the industry, when they do adopt the recommendations of TRB or these best practices, can ensure that we have truly conducted the projects appropriately and brought as many voices to the conversation as possible. So that is our charge. but it therefore is time consuming to ensure that we have assembled the right team to work on a project, that we are being thorough and truly assessing the state of our practice, doing adequate background research to then bring that to bear in our recommendations. And so we work very diligently to keep the procurement process, if we're hiring a consultant, as short as possible, to make sure that once a report is completed, it's reviewed by the academies as quickly as possible so we can get it published and out for public consumption. But there's aspects of our process that we really can't shorten because it is all about the quality of the work. So I'd say the average project is between 1 and 2 years, but it truly depends on the nature of the research and what we're being asked to do. It's our timelines are tailored to that individual research opportunity.
Victoria, here's another question that gets at the notion of stakeholders. Rush Wicks asks, could TRB do more outreach to the transportation planning community? For example, the American Planning Association. I feel sometimes the two organizations are in separate silos. What do you think?
So yes, there's always additional opportunities for partnership and collaboration. As I mentioned earlier, we have close to 180 standing committees and around 200 subcommittees. These are organized into 10 groups, 18 sections. And so we really have a committee for every aspect of transportation, every phase in the life cycle of assets, every mode of transportation. And so that is one of our challenges. Again, we're touching a little bit of everything. So making sure that we are working collaboratively with the other associations who are doing work in that space, again, so that they can benefit from what TRB is doing, but also we can ensure that we have the right participants in the research that we're conducting. The associations are a great resource for us when it comes to assembling the appropriate team.
Victoria, in your work at New Hampshire DOT and Massachusetts DOT, you did work that was aimed at serving the mobility needs of demographic groups that perhaps have been left behind. Could you talk to us a little bit about that and perhaps the role that TRB can play in that as well?
So during my last couple of years as commissioner in New Hampshire, I was fortunate to be appointed to a number of councils that Governor Sununu had established, and then that the legislature formalized in statute. One was the Council for Thriving Children. Another was a council on housing stability. And so you might think, well, why would the commissioner for the Department of Transportation be actively engaged in that work? And really it was because we had an all-of-government approach to solving some of the societal issues that we were experiencing. Many of those meetings would start with an individual sharing their lived experience. And oftentimes it was a lack of access to transportation that was their barrier when it came to accessing either services or accessing employment. Our economy in New Hampshire was booming. We actually were attracting individuals into the state, but that was driving up housing prices. So, a lack of affordable housing was pushing certain individuals out of employment centers into more rural regions of the state. And those locations, if they didn't have access to transportation, then maybe they couldn't access those employment opportunities. And so these individuals, may still have been underemployed and unable to reach their full potential, in some cases struggling financially. But meanwhile, then we had the workforce challenges associated with that because the businesses of all size, couldn't recruit the talent that they needed. So this is why we were really working to bring all the stakeholders to the table to think about things in a more holistic way, to think about land use and transportation together, as opposed to asking the transportation professionals to provide the services and the connections from point A to point B once some of the decisions had been made.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the integration of transportation with other needs like housing, et cetera. My last guest on Café IBTTA was our president, Andrew Fremier, who's the deputy executive director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Bay Area Toll Authority. Not only do they have operate several toll bridges and have transit needs, but they also are in charge of a housing authority. And it's interesting to see the connections between the different parts of our economy that we're trying to get them to work together. And I see that happening in the research of TRB as well. So, Victoria, we mentioned, or we talked a little bit earlier about maybe a little bit different pace of work, the change in pace or the cadence of your work at a state DOT versus TRB. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Working as commissioner of a Department of Transportation, it really was a 24/7 job. Especially during the pandemic, it was a really challenging time. And many of our state DOTs were integral to the state's response to COVID-19. Our department in New Hampshire helped set up testing sites and vaccine sites. We ran call centers for appointment scheduling because states have this all hands approach when it comes to meeting the needs of our citizens at any point in time. So yes, it was a fast-paced job on occasion. I feel like every season brought its own challenges. Right now, my colleagues in New Hampshire are dealing with some winter weather. I don't have to watch the forecast every day like I once did. Although I have to say in January, with 12,000 people descending on DC, I was paying very close attention to the weather that particular week and how it might impact our schedule. But I loved my time both in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire working for departments of transportation because the work truly matters. And so why was I interested in pursuing this job? It's to make sure that we're equipping those who work in our industry with the tools to be effective. A big part of my role in New Hampshire was to explain to the legislature how we were making decisions and that we were trying to stretch the value of the dollars they were giving us and have the most possible benefit for the people that we served. As president of AASHTO, I got to advocate for investment in transportation. I was vice president and then president as we were working on reauthorization, and ultimately the IIJA was passed just after my time as president. But making sure that we continue to strive to do things in a more efficient and effective way, to provide a higher level of service to those who are using our transportation systems. These are the things that TRB is focused on. And like I said, being able to have that impact across our industry, I'm just extremely fortunate to be in this role and to be able to do that type of work.
Your good friend Mary Jane O'Mara says in the chat, we loved having you in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So that raises a practical issue. So you've had to leave behind New England and move your family to the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. What's that been like for you?
So we're grappling with a lot of these same lifestyle choices that others are grappling with. As we think about where we want to live, do we want to have walkability and be able to, access that more urban setting? Do we want to be out in the suburbs? I have a young son, he's 5 years old. And so, of course, he wants to know where he's going to go to school. His highest priority is that there's either a playground nearby our new home or that we have a swing set in the backyard. So we're trying to figure out exactly where we want to be. We're taking our time, but we're excited to be living in this area. I'm going to miss New England terribly, but already we're starting to feel at home in the DMV.
That's great. Victoria, I'm going to make a couple of announcements and then I'll come back to you for some final words of wisdom. So next week, our guest on Café IBTTA is Dr. Morteza Farajian, the Executive Director of the Build America Bureau at the US DOT. Other upcoming events include the Communications HR and Legal Workshop, March 15 through 28 in Norfolk, Virginia. Also the Technology Summit, April 29 through May 2nd in Indianapolis, and our Road Usage Charging and Finance Summit, June 4 through 6 in Salt Lake City. Check the IBTTA website for details on all of our upcoming events. Well, Victoria, tell us, what final words of wisdom do you have before we sign off today?
So I like to quote others when it comes to words of wisdom. So each year, one of the signature events at TRB's annual meeting is the Dean Lecture. The Dean Lectureship recognizes the career contributions of an individual in one of the areas covered by TRB's technical activities. And those honorees are then invited to present their thoughts on their specialty area. So this year, our recipient was Chuck Fu, and his lecture can be found on TRB's website. I encourage you all to view that. And I'm not going to quote him verbatim, but Chuck was talking about managed lanes and the history of the practice. And he had some advice for transportation professionals, and it really does align with the work of TRB. So I think he said something to this effect, like we should challenge our own practices, test the status quo, and be subjected to an incremental loss of credibility if we don't, because the world is changing and we must evolve to meet the challenges of the day. So those words really stuck with me. And so, like I said, please go and view the full lecture. It was a terrific event, and there's a lot more words of wisdom from Chuck throughout his presentation.
Victoria, thank you so much for those words of wisdom and for being our guest today. It was a delight. And to all our viewers, thank you for joining us. Be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road.